welcome back to the Nascent Moon Custom YouTube channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at a custom holster for a 629. This 629 has a scope on it, so our holster is going to have a slot. This holster is going to be made of black leather, some parts 2 layers thick, other parts will be single layers. Now, depending on exactly, the needs of the scope determines the height of this channel. We'll get into that over the course of these 2 different holsters we'll be making. The first one has a slightly smaller channel. You'll see we'll make a bone, if you will, that will go between the 2 layers of leather. We'll get into all that as the video progresses. But in the meantime, take a look at as we lay out things going forward. We'll cut out some pieces and then really get into assembling a few things. Enjoy. Just like any project, you always have to start laying out your material. Coming into this next phase, I've made a lot of different paper patterns. This one has been used on a couple different builds thus far. Just nice for holding the lower D-ring that will end up going down to your belt support. Here you can see one of our main templates for the holster. This one we will end up drawing in this fashion and then flipping it here in a second as well. You have to make sure you flip your pattern over just to make sure that it is going to be as symmetrical as possible. Now, you theoretically could do away with cutting out both of these and just using a more approximation for the interior of the 2. You'll see later in the video, but it's nice to have 2 general shapes for what you're going to be looking at. Alright, through here we're starting to separate the main patterns from the hide. I used a razor blade on this part. It worked alright. You'll see I changed cutting tools here in a little while. Again, more razor blade. Now really starting to get these patterns cut out. It's nice to do this part actually up on the table so you're not breaking your back on the floor. Alright, now here we're using an X-Acto knife to try to get in through some of these tighter curves. I should have had a slightly sharper blade through here. As you can see, I cut through these a couple times, but you get there. Alright, we've got that one all free. Now we've swapped over to probably the best tool out of all of them. It's a little bit more proper for leather working. They do have a similar version of this knife that's a little bit more angled, so you can kind of roll your wrist with it. I should acquire one of those as time goes on. Alright, now to cutting out the other parts. These are the shoulder pads that our strapping will run through, or the rigging, depending on how you want to call it. Alright, here is our main back piece. This is where all of our rivets will go through. And here you can see we have our main D-ring support for the holster. This part has indeed been used for another pattern as well, the earlier C96 project, which I don't know if we posted too much about. Alright, now here we have attaching that lower D-ring support to the main holster. You can see I changed this one up a bit, cut it a bit more triangular just to give it a different look. It looked a little bit too bulky on this build, having the full rectangle, so changed it up a bit. Alright, now we are sewing on the D-ring to the lower part. This is all done before we actually attach both pieces together. That way in the interior of the holster you don't have any stitching to get buggered up in the future. Alright, now here back to our D-ring support for the shoulder parts of the holster. What I'm doing here is putting in the gouging for or grooves for the stitch to go in, since this will be the part that will be right up against your body. most important to have those stitches in. You'll see on this project some stitches are embedded and some are more exterior. Really just depends on the look you're going for as far as I'm concerned with these projects. Alright, now we're to the interesting part. This is what I like to call the bones of the holster. Given that this is going to be for a revolver with a scope, you have to have the top of the holster open to accommodate that scope. So, to make sure that during drawing and more importantly reholstering for the scope to remain, or I'm sorry, for the holster to remain open enough for the scope to go in, this really is going to beef it up a lot. You'll see once it gets in, it looks pretty good, and you'll be surprised at really how much it holds this rigid. You know, you could crush it if you stepped on it, of course, but for what it's designed for, it's perfectly sturdy. Alright, now here we are flattening it out. One thing this is nice for, too, is it's actually strengthening up the metal just a little bit, getting it all back in line, fix any of the little micro bends I might have put in there. Straighten her all out a good bit, nice and flat now. Right. Now through this next part, we're going to start rounding in for our barrel and near the cylinder, because of course this is just in front of the cylinder here where this bend takes place, so you want it a little bit wide. Now through this next part, it wasn't durable enough. This is a 28 gauge piece of metal, so I decided I would angle it a bit more, give it another bend in there to really make it a lot more rigid. Bring it a little bit around the corner there, come back up the other way, and go on back down. Alright, now through here we have a bit of dremeling. This is really just more for me at the meantime, so I don't cut myself during install. It was a bit sharp using those those cuts getting around there. And again, just dulling off the tip for the same reasoning. It's basically a little harpoon down there, so didn't want to bleed that much. Now this next part, we're drilling in some holes, and these holes will accommodate our threading to actually attach this bone to the holster. Might do a couple more holes next time, but honestly it worked pretty good having the amount we did. Alright, now through here, just getting rid of the prickly bits so that way we don't tear out our stitching while we're putting it through. I did have to end up coming back and making these holes just a little bit bigger with an awl. Should have used one drill bit size bigger, so that is one thing we got to do for next time. Alright, now here we are setting our stitch lines. Making sure we line it all up right. Trying to figure out where those holes are exactly, making sure we can get the stitch nice and tight to hold the bone down. Alright, looking good. Now this is a really nice hand stitching tool. Holds a bobbin in the end. String comes up and out the front, and it works just like a sewing machine would, if you will. So all you have to do is loop it through on the other end. You can see I've got a needle on the other end of my string as well. You push the main awl device through, if you will, and loop it through. Certainly a little more work than using the weaver machine, but that would not work on this job. Little hand tying right there at the end, burn off the ends, smush them down so nothing comes undone. Start again at the other top and meet it at the bottom. Used to have a different hand tool that did not have a bobbin in the end, so you just have two big loose pieces of thread double stitching through. More like how, you know, is more commonly done, but that tool just makes it faster. Alright, burn off that end, and the bone is installed. This part now, once we've got the bone in, I can situate everything else. This next piece here is going to actually be what's going to retain our pistol into the holster. This is the first time I've used this design for this part. It allows it to be a little bit more adjustable, or I should say entirely adjustable, depending on the tension you want. So this part right here is just the strapping that will reach over the top. You see the other half in a little bit here. Yep, just tying that all on, getting it finished up. Burn it off. Alright, now we're getting the D-ring holder situated there. Coming over, bobbing up our machine. Don't know if that's a phrase, but it is now. Alright, now we're stitching. Let's see how much easier this is. How much faster. I mean, it's obviously sped up, but the one thing that is hard with this machine, and I might try to change it later on as moving comes, but it'd be nice to try to set up a treadle for this. I know I'd have to re-gear the wheel, but then that way I could have two hands on the work. That's the one problem, is you only get the left hand driving. A little comparing against our sketch, making sure it's looking good. Alright, and here comes the second half. You can see it's going to be a snap, so that way when, you know, you need it, you can get to it. But at the end of that snap, you can see we've got a little bit of metal hardware, and that allows our main cord to come over the top, go through there and be adjustable, allowing you to really get a nice tight fit, or, you know, a little looser should you want it. Really kind of depends. Alright, now this part was a little bit of a trick. Making sure that bone didn't shift. We were blowing in these holes. These are obviously some of the more important stitches on the holster. Not that not that the others aren't, but these ones go right around the scope. So this is the Goldilocks zone, if you will. Alright, we're looking good. Blowing our holes on the other part. This is actually our interior piece. Again, getting our sewing all ready here. Don't know if that's what it's called, but there you go. Alright, and it's officially one piece. Albeit not done quite yet, but it is right there, officially one part. Now I just sewed this down, and it was amazing. At this point, you could really start to feel that bone in there starting to actually really become more rigid. You know, having one piece of leather and then the metal was durable. Having the two pieces, that got it. Now you can see what I just put in there with my scraper was a nice little gouge for my thread to go. So that way, as the main front sight comes up, again, you're not touching that stitching, because this is the only part of the stitching that's going to be on the inside. It was right there. And then right up on the top edge, of course, too. But that's the one that actually, if it was going to take it, would take the abuse. So you got to make sure you get that one hidden in there. Alright, just about up that scope channel. And the important thing with this one is I actually ended up pulling these through the inside between them. You can see right there, I'm actually getting those threads between the layers to end, so that way there's no little rough parts anywhere for that to get bound up on the gun or otherwise. If you can hide your ends, do it. Alright, stretching it out, seeing how it has to lay. We had a really nice line up there. Alright, time to commit. Now I know there's a lot of different kinds of adhesive people use on these projects, but I started using wood glue, and to be honest with you, I found it works pretty nice. It's a little bit more firm, so you end up with, you know, a little bit more rigidity to your holster, so it's not going to be perfect for all your projects, depending on, you know, what you're doing. But for holsters, it's pretty nice. You know, wood glue in the, you know, woodworking kind of side of things, you know, people say it's stronger than the wood is. So to have a layer in there of that kind of, you know, substrate is really quite nice between the leather. And obviously, since it's, you know, meant for wood fibers, it binds to the fibers of the leather just flawlessly. So yep, getting all the edges pinched up. You can see I'm letting it dry in a bit of an arc. That way there's not going to be any extra leather roll on the inside. Alright. Over to the shoulder bit. Now you can see I've already put the studs through there. Those are brass rivets I cut down. They started out about 1 inch long, cut them down to about 1/2 inch for this particular project and filed them around. I didn't happen to have the camera set up for that part, so maybe you'll see that next time. Yep, cruising around the corners. Again, this machine makes this kind of stuff so much easier. I used to have to hand do all this, and oh, it's better these days. Alright, here comes a real satisfying part of this. Lining up the holster itself. Now through here, pretty easy. The cut was good. We've already fit it just a little bit once before to make sure it was going to be a good fit, but it's nice to get it all pinned up before you actually go at it. Get it crushed, stab down, and roll. It's always important to make sure those little clips don't hit the base there, because if it does, you get like a half step in your stitching, and oh, it's irritating. Just, you know, it holds it fine because I've got a nice step to it. I'm not exactly sure what my spacing is, but you can see it, and it just doesn't look as good. So it's always good to make sure your machine's gonna step right. Stop there, right at the top of that curve, so that way it just pinches that trigger guard in there. Alright, another satisfying part of this. Getting these edges all rolled out. They go from a really dull, you know, raw leather kind of texture. You put a little bit of this on there and away you go. I'll have to put in on the screen here exactly what that is that I'm using. Didn't used to use that. I used to use shoe polish. Didn't have as good of an effect, but it gave you an alright edge. This stuff works much better though. And here we have the finished main holster. Turned out really well. You can see the nice pattern stitch around the bones on the outside. Here you can see all the D-rings with their nice mounts. They really turned out quite nice. The edge is good and smooth. Excellent scope channel. The strap up there is very nice. The inside's hard to get a good shot of, but it's smooth in there too. There you get a nice bit of the finish that came up around the top as well. I wasn't able to film that part, but it's there. Beautiful snap with the retention adjustment. It's a good looking holster. That concludes the 629 custom build part 1. Part 2, we'll take a look at more of the straps, finishing out the shoulder pads and all the other little bits that we got to finish out. The other thing we'll take a look at will be the speed loader holder that'll go on the other side. There's going to be 2 speed loaders on that side. You did get to take just a little bit of a look at one of those patterns, I think, sitting on the table at one point. Otherwise, I'll put it up on the screen, although it is on our TikTok as well. Speaking of, we do have TikTok. We've got Instagram, a Facebook page, and a website out there too. Website's coming along. Don't judge us yet. It's almost done. But yeah, feel free and check all those other things out. Go ahead and like the page and subscribe if you hadn't yet. And otherwise, thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.